so find yourself in standing. Take a couple moments to turn your attention inward. I did an FI with a new client yesterday, and we had this really amazing experience. He's about 70, has some challenges with his mobility. And after the FI, he was very moved, and he said that he felt a younger version of himself, like when he could move effortlessly, which of course is like ultimately what we're doing here, right? So for me, that evoked an idea of what is that, you know, can I even harness in my memory what effortless feels like, right? And I'm a pretty mobile person, but wherever you're at with your mobility, you can maybe take a moment and think in the way that you feel yourself now. If there was a feeling of more freedom, more space that you could have in yourself and standing right now, what would it be for you? And then it's interesting to think if there was that small spaciousness or ease, would it change in some way how you feel like you're presenting yourself? And then, you know, with that idea, do with it what you will. Maybe it's totally bananas, you don't know what I'm talking about, but take a little walk around the space and just consider that now in movement. And then see if you can take that idea, that image, that feeling with you and come lay down on the floor, make yourself comfortable on your back. And notice the way that the back of your right heel is resting on the floor. And follow your attention from your right heel up your lower leg to your knee. And from behind your knee along the back of your right thigh. And see if you can get a sense of transition from your thigh into your buttock, which would be your femur, your thigh bone, into the hip joint. And does your thigh feel like it connects into your buttock, or do you feel like your thigh connects more in the front of your pelvis? And then bring your attention to your left heel. Is there any kind of difference in the weight or the position of your left heel compared to your right heel? And now follow your attention from your left heel to the back of your calf, your lower left leg. And then to the back of your left knee. Notice the kind of contact that you feel behind your left thigh. And what's different about the contact of your left thigh and your right thigh. And then on this side, notice the way that you feel the connection from your thigh into your buttock. The way that you perceive each structure. And then again, the idea from the skeletal perspective of how your femur is connecting to your hip joint. And it might turn out that the way that you perceive this hip joint is somehow different from the way that you get an image of your right hip joint. Now, somewhere between your two hip joints is your sacrum, the back of your pelvis. The bottom of your sacrum turns into your tailbone. And then the top of your sacrum turns into the lowest vertebrae of your lumbar, of your low back spine. And then you have the sort of the archways, the arch shape of the back of your pelvis on the right and the left side of your sacrum. And then notice overall the way that you feel the curvature of your low back. It's a bit of a misnomer. your low back? What are you actually feeling? Are you feeling part of your sacrum? Feeling part of your rib cage? What is happening there? And now, what do you notice about your rib cage in the back? Where does that start and where does that end? And what kind of image do you have of where your shoulder blade is resting on the top of your ribs in the back, on the right and the left? And then from your two shoulder blades, sense where the actual shoulder joints are. And then notice what kind of differences you feel in your right arm and your left arm. And then again, from your two arms, bring your attention back to your shoulder blades. And see if from the perspective of your shoulder blades, you can sense where is the true base of your neck, the bottom vertebrae of your cervical spine. Where does your neck actually begin? And then where does your neck end? What kind of curvature do you feel behind your neck? And compare for a moment the way that you perceive the curvature of your neck and the way that you perceive the curvature of your low back. And again, it's kind of a trippy idea when you think of a curvature. If you really drop into the two ends of the bow, the two ends that create the curvature. So with your neck, that means where on your skull begins the curvature of your neck, where in your shoulders ends the curvature of your neck. And then, like you did already, where on your ribs or your low back to your pelvis, where's that curvature happening? And then how do you feel the back of your head? And start to investigate what kind of super minute movement could you do with the back of your head that might have some sort of sensory influence on your neck and even your low back. Just do a little research. Maybe there's nothing, but just get curious about how you could move or adjust the back of your skull, the position of the back of your skull, and whether or not you sense any kind of connection down your spine to your tailbone. And what do you notice about your breathing when you're paying attention to yourself in this way? Now bend your knees and stand your feet. Have your feet at least hip width apart. Try to find the placement of your feet that you feel the most connection to the rest of you. And then super slowly start to tilt your two knees to the right a little bit and back, to the left a little bit and back. And go slow enough that you have time to keep feeling the continuum of your spine now from your tailbone up to the back of your skull. Notice the feeling on the bottoms of your feet. And it could be useful to do some research about where you have them placed, because it might turn out that the way that you're using the musculature of your legs and your back is more excessive than it needs to be. And that by just changing the alignment of your skeleton, you might actually find a way to reduce the muscular contraction that's involved with the movement. And then pause with that for a second. Keep your feet standing. And then put your left ankle on your right knee. And tilt your two knees to the right and come back. Let me change how I said that. Keep your left leg on your right leg, glued to your right leg, and tilt your right knee to the right and come back. So that your left leg is essentially going for a ride. And what do you notice about your back when you do this? Keep going, but bring your arms out to the right and the left on the floor. And again, continue to follow from your tailbone up to the back of your skull. See if there's anywhere that you might be pressing or contracting. Okay, pause with that, uncross your legs. All right, so change the crossing. Now put your, which one? Right one on your left, right ankle on your left knee. And now see what it feels like to tilt your left knee to the left, left knee to the left. And your right leg is just along for the ride. And is it different the way that that movement travels up you? Is it more prominent in a certain area? Is the connection more integrated on one side? It's really interesting, these kinds of movements in this perspective, because it's likely if there's one part of you that really stands out in your attention, it could be that that's the part of you that things are really getting stuck. There's a lot of activity in that area, and that the distribution of effort could be improved. Maybe it's something else, but that's something interesting to just notice in yourself. And then even though I'm directing you toward a lot of detail, keep coming back to your own pleasure. And you probably already know how to completely ignore me and to just drop into your own sensation, which I welcome. Okay, now give that a rest for a sec. Bring your legs down, bring your arms back down, and notice the way that you're making contact with the floor at this point. And then stand your 2 feet wide apart again. And reach your right arm straight up in the air, but have your wrist soft and your hand and your fingers soft. And start to gently reach your arm toward the ceiling and over to your left in a way that feels nice. And then come back to where you started. And notice as you're doing this movement, that's essentially your shoulder joint, your shoulder blade, what happens to your spine from the back of your skull to your tailbone. And you can change the trajectory of your arm. Absolutely. Maybe your arm goes toward the ceiling and then toward your left knee. Maybe it goes toward the ceiling and you know, at the level of your head to the left. You play with it a little bit and find your pleasure. And you go slow enough that you can notice if there's any unnecessary contractions. I was working with someone yesterday doing similar kinds of movements, and he had an interesting habit of tensing his left shoulder when he would use his right shoulder. I think that's a pretty common habit of non-differentiation across the shoulder blades. So that's an interesting one you could notice for yourself. When you're reaching your right arm, are you actually tightening in your left chest or in your left shoulder? And if you find that you are, what if you were to press instead? Press your left chest, left shoulder down a few times, and then do it without doing anything with the left side, and just see if you can sort of minimize the tension on your left side as you're reaching with your right. Now rest your right arm for a moment and feel how your two shoulders are resting on the floor and the sides of your upper back. Notice if even just that little movement created any kind of change. And then bring your left arm up and start the same kind of exploration, reaching up toward the ceiling and now over to the right and back. And on this side, as you're reaching, imagine what you're reaching for. And then add in support for your spine by moving the two ends of your spine. What does that mean? Right? Your head is connected to one end of your spine. Your pelvis is connected to the other end of your spine. So as you're reaching your arm, how can you help with a movement of your head and your pelvis? And if you haven't tried it already, try rolling your head to the right and rolling your pelvis to the right as you're reaching your arm to the right. And find your pleasure. And then you're going to start to go back and forth. So next time you're flat on your back, reach your right arm up and over to the left and roll your head and your pelvis to the left and let your knees both tilt to the left, and then come back and then reach your left arm up and across yourself slowly and gently. Go slow enough that, again, you can see if there's any effort in your neck that's not serving you, your chest, your shoulders, maybe a totally different part, right? Go slow enough that you can sense where the movement can be creamier. And try it with your feet fairly wide apart so that as your knees are tilting, one knee comes toward the bottom of the opposite foot. And then the other knee will go toward the bottom of the other foot. And in that way, your legs are in the alignment they would be in if you were side sitting. And maybe as you're playing with this movement, you can imagine yourself coming up to side sitting one way and then coming up to side sitting the other way. Make sure that you're going slow enough that you can still feel what you're doing, right? Even though side sitting is now a direction to go into, the moment you're determined to side sit, you'll immediately bring in your habits of straining where you love to strain, right? So it's really about this experience of being in process. It's maddening, isn't it? Just to be in process for an hour. How delightful. And see what it feels like. Do you like the feeling? Can you do anything that makes the feeling even more delicious? Or if it's not delicious, can you change it so that it is a little bit more pleasant for yourself? And if you organically find yourself rolling to side sitting, then play with that too. Right? So also don't limit yourself. Everybody that does these lessons is at a different place with their mobility and different ways. So you just see where you're at and what supports a feeling of pleasure and connection. And if you're moving towards side sitting, you can use the arm that swings across yourself as sort of the catalyst. Maybe you can play with the image of somebody taking you by the arm and pulling you over into side sitting. And if you were to keep, if that person was to keep pulling your arm, you would actually end up standing on your knees. And if they kept pulling your arm, you would eventually take a step and stand up. So again, there's no objective. Standing up is not where you want to be. It's just this idea of building on your own sense of self. And ideally, that's going to be not tethered to what you've always done before, right? So you go slow enough that you're actually open to what could express itself unexpectedly. And that's what we're practicing anyway. Right? And then remember what we did last week? We were talking about lifting the back of the skull. Remember the stuff we did lifting the back of the skull? You were side sitting and you were lifting your skull, reaching your arm. You were standing on one knee, lifting your skull, lifting your arm. Maybe you remember that, maybe you don't. Again, just ideas so you can have some more sort of free play here. Some of you had started to fall a little bit last week. No one fell from standing, but some of you were falling from kneeling. Some of you were falling from side sitting. And, you know, some of you are just super mobile people. And so then it really becomes about sensing more of your whole self, right? Sensing your breathing and sensing more of the details of, oh shit, I still do that little clenching in that place, or I do have that tendency to do that thing with my neck or my chin, right? Okay, but yeah, leave it for now. Come and take a nice rest on your back and just see, after doing what you've done, does that have any influence on the way that you're resting on your back? And now bend your knees and stand your feet again. Have your feet wide apart. And let's say put your right ankle on your left knee again. And now this time, put your left hand behind your head and hold on to your right foot with your right hand if you can reach it. Otherwise, your knee or your thigh. And if you can reach your foot, then hold on to the baby toe side of your foot from the top of your foot. But no, you pick it up. Yeah, pick up your foot and take it off of your leg. If you're super flexible, maybe it stays on your leg, but hold I see your foot was on your knee as a starting point. So it makes it easier to pick up your foot. And now have your left elbow toward the ceiling and very, very nonchalantly and curiously start to lift your foot a little bit toward the ceiling when you let your air come out. And what many of you have spontaneously done is also lift your head when you're lifting your foot. And so you see, how does that serve you? If you lift your foot and your head at the same time, does it somehow make it easier to lift your foot? And some of you lift your foot and your head straight forward. Some of you roll a little bit. So I'm happy to see that you're kind of investigating where you can get a sense of ease. And when we started, I said that this was really about a quite lovely low back release. So as you're lifting your head and your foot, notice how you're using your low back and what parts of your back or your ribs are pressing into the floor. Right? But don't forget about your breathing. And if it just becomes like two things to remember, do your own research. So my suggestion is that you exhale when you lift your head and your foot, but why don't you lift your head and foot when you inhale and see for yourself if it's different. Okay, and then let that go and rest for a moment. And if you have your legs long and your arms down, notice if, again, just that little movement created any kind of change in the resting tonus along the back of you. And notice the way it feels to breathe more into your back. And then come and configure yourself the opposite way. So your left ankle is on your right knee. And then reach with your left hand to hold your left foot, left ankle, knee, whatever you can hold without straining. Put your right hand behind your head. And continue to investigate how it feels to now lift your left foot toward the ceiling as you're lifting your head and as you're breathing out. And remember, now you're essentially lifting two ends of your spine, right? Your foot is connected to your leg, connected to your pelvis, connected to the bottom of your spine. And your hand is holding your head, connected to the top of your spine. So when you lift the two ends of your spine a little bit, what do you experience in the middle part of your spine? And you can again play with rolling a little bit. Maybe it feels best to lift straight forward. Maybe it's interesting to lift and rock yourself a bit to the left side of your back or the right side of your back. And just check for all of our favorite parasitic actions like tooth clenching, belly squeezing, groin squeezing. Right? Sometimes it's useful to let your air come out of your mouth for a few breaths. Sighing is always nice to reduce any sort of tension buildup. And it can also be useful in between lifts to make sure that you're actually pausing so that you're not just getting into a do. You create the contraction to lift and then you let that go. Okay, and then do rest with that for a moment. Bring your legs down and your arms down. And again, notice how you're resting on the floor. Maybe roll your head a bit left and right. Make sure there's no secret tension coming in there. Yeah. Notice how long your neck feels, how long your low back feels. And then again, bend your knees, stand your feet, have your feet wide apart, and go back to the previous movement of tilting your two legs left and right. And now you can start to increase the movement so that again, one knee comes to look at the bottom of your opposite foot. And then when you tilt the other way, the other knee goes to look at the bottom of the other foot. And you see how that feels. And what happens with your head when you're tilting your legs like that? And then something you can play with, if you can do so without any strain, is to pause in the middle, interlace your fingers behind your head, lift your head away from the floor a comfortable amount and keep it lifted. So make sure your elbows are forward, right? So you're not straining your neck. You're really using your arms to keep your head lifted. And then what happens if you continue the leg tilting with your head lifted? Just slowly, one knee wants to see what the bottom of your foot looks like. Then the other knee wants to see what the bottom of your other foot looks like. Yeah. Your elbows are pretty close to each other in front of you so that your upper back is rounded. And I certainly think of this as a back massage. You can see how it feels for you. And use your feet, right? Use your feet. Use your feet as you're tilting your knees. So your feet stay more or less where they are. And you're just pressing into the floor where they're standing. And so your upper body and your head are just going to listen to what kind of message you're transmitting from your feet and your knees. You keep your feet and your knees connected. That's it. Great. Okay. And then give it a rest again. And feel yourself on the floor. And notice what's bubbling to the surface for you. Maybe you can find a fun or interesting way to roll yourself over onto your front side. However you want to. You're just going to roll over onto your front side in a way that feels interesting or nice. And then when you get onto your front side, put one of your cheeks down on the floor and put your two hands above your head on the floor. Have your legs spread fairly wide apart. And then bend up your two knees. And have your feet above your knee. Your heel above your knee. So as opposed to your heels being close to your bum, your heels are above your knees. Yeah. And now notice that for all intents and purposes, you're in the same position as you were when you were on your back with your feet standing, right? Now imagine yourself where you just were, on your back with your feet standing. In that situation, you were tilting your knees. In this situation, you're going to tilt your feet. And so one foot is going to look toward your opposite knee. And then you come back and your other foot looks towards your other knee. Right? So have your legs wide apart, wide enough apart that can make sense. Your left foot looks at your right knee. Your right foot then looks at your left knee. Yes, exactly. And some of you are already experimenting with your head, right? You can see, what does it feel like to tilt your legs with your head in one position? What does it feel like to tilt your legs when your other cheek is down? Maybe your forehead is down. And some of you have even started to investigate moving your head with your feet. So again, you have this opportunity to make it your own. to feel your own sense of connection and pleasure. But just make sure you're not getting into like, you know, your favorite movement habit. It's your chance to do things in new and novel ways. So if you really recognize yourself, try to change it up. There's certain movements that I know I will constantly avoid doing because it's not really comfortable. And yet if I did that movement at a very small degree, it would be fine, right? But I just find it, I have a tendency to motivate toward the same kind of movements a lot. So just notice that for yourself. And there's still this conversation about your low back being free and adaptable, and a deeper sense of connection from the top to the bottom of your spine. And could you imagine yourself coming to side sitting from doing this movement? The thing is, if you do it, if you just attempt to come to side sitting, it's almost inevitable that you'll use your back and your neck the way that you're most used to using it, because you're like, I need to succeed at this. I don't want to fuck around. I got to just do what I know, right? But if you imagine it, you might find that there's ways that you could use your back and your shoulders that might otherwise not occur to you. So I'm not suggesting that you come up to side sitting. I just want you to play with the idea of the transformation of this movement of your pelvis into a function. And then how would you come onto your back? Find a fun way to roll onto your back again and take a little rest on your back. So these movements can be extremely therapeutic for your back, but of course they also could be a strain for your back. The therapeutic element is available when your back has a chance to do something it doesn't usually do, which is probably release. Yeah. But if you keep asking yourself to perform, your back's just going to be like, I got this, boss, I got this, right? Your back has a New York accent, by the way. Okay, bend your knees, stand your feet. Goofy times, goofy times. Put your right ankle on your left knee. Hold on to your right foot with your right hand. This time, put your left arm flat along the floor, alongside your head. Okay, now let's try this. Let me think for a second, actually. Yeah, let's try this. I'm trying to weave in what we had done. So see if you can keep holding onto your foot or your leg, but lengthen your left arm along the floor. And just see what happens. Your left arm is sort of parallel to your head somehow. And someone just put a cookie just out of reach of your left hand, but you don't want anyone to know that you're going to take the cookie. So you want to be very sneaky about creeping your hand in the direction of the cookie, but you're holding onto your right foot. So you got to sort of figure out what you need to do with your leg and your pelvis and your back so that you can head toward that cookie. And I mean, it can be as goofy as you like. Who knows? Who knows what you might need to do with that right foot in order to get to that cookie? And it's interesting. Does it serve you, when you're reaching your left arm, does it serve you to have your weight more on the right side of you or more on the left side of you? Switch your arms and legs and see what happens. And of course, rest whenever you got to rest, right? So now the cookie's just out of reach of your right hand. Your right arm is alongside your head to the right or out to the right, wherever it's comfortable for your shoulder. And as you're reaching, you've got this pesky left foot in your hand. So how do you adjust where that foot is so that you could actually reach your right arm longer? You don't really want it. I don't believe you. It is like a cookie that's filled with diamonds that you can sell. Okay, you're gonna all have to pick your own motivation then. I mean, I don't know. If it's not a cookie filled with diamonds, I don't know what. And because this kind of thing is going to happen all the time, right? We have what we want, and then we have the thing that's getting in our way. So we can either fight with the thing that's in our way, or we start to get real clever about how we can use the thing that's in our way. All right, and then have a rest. Bend your knees and stand your feet again. Put your right ankle on your left knee. Bring your left arm up alongside yourself on the floor next to your head. Yeah, hold on to your right foot with your right hand, or hold your knee or your thigh. And now start to play with lifting your right, you're holding your right foot with your right hand. So start to play with lifting your right foot up toward the ceiling as you roll onto your left side. And notice the difference it makes depending on where you put that foot. So in other words, if your foot is aimed toward your face as you reach it to the ceiling, if it's aimed toward your left knee as you put it toward the ceiling. Okay, and then leave that for a moment. And when you're ready, you'll switch sides. Your right arm is long on the floor next to your head. Hold on to your left foot with your left hand and start to reach your foot up toward the ceiling, over to the right. Roll onto your right side and return. Keep asking yourself where you can reduce the effort, where you can make more space between yourself and your conditioning. Maybe you're used to getting your strength from your chest. Do you have strength from somewhere else? Maybe you're used to getting your strength from your belly or your back. What else can you use? What about your feet? What about your elbows? Okay, make sure you're still having fun. We'll do one more piece. Take a little rest for a second. See if anything's changing in the way that you kind of see yourself after letting it out a bit. Okay, so once again, stand your feet, hold on to your right foot with your right hand. Left arm alongside your head. Hold on to the top of your foot. Now, what happens if you roll onto your right side as you lift your foot? And now you've got a pesky left foot. You've got a pesky left hand. What are you going to do with those guys? Do they just have to be dragged in the wind? Right? What happens? Are you still a functional whole, or do you just become focused on the one thing that you're doing? What about side sitting? Is there anything when you're rolling on your right, is there anything that looks like side sitting? What about if you rolled your right and then you rolled your left and then you rolled your right again? And yes, of course, make it your own as you wish. And also just stay connected to yourself. Take breaks when you got to take breaks. And then maybe for a while you play with the other side. So you hold your left foot with your left hand. It's a funny little constraint. It means that you're using the left side of your back differently than the right side of your back. That's why we have those constraints in Feldenkrais, because it requires you use yourself differently. And do you have an image of side sitting? Could you keep hold of your foot and find side sitting on one side? And some of you are going to find side sitting on the other side too. Some of you are like, what are you talking about side sitting? Right? So it's just for your own pleasure. So you just find where you are and what you can learn about yourself from what you're doing. And then when you're cooked and you take your rest. And then yes, do take a rest if you're not resting already. Lengthen yourself out. Notice the way that your legs are making contact with the floor from your heels to your buttocks. And listen for if there's any little changes from when we began. Notice the way that you feel the curvature of your low back and your ribs in the back, and then the curvature of your neck and the back of your skull, and the feeling of your two shoulders and your two arms. And then, you know, when we began, I asked you to start to think about what effortlessness feels like for yourself, where there's a feeling of spaciousness that you can imagine or remember. So as usual, I'm going to leave you with your 5 minutes to yourself to rest. Yeah, you know, when you come up to walking around, again, just kind of observing the feeling of effort in your walking and standing, or maybe just take a nice long rest. And thank you for coming. Hope to see you soon.